Welcome to the Midstream News Podcast. I'm Kevin Broom with GPA Midstream, and I'm joined today by GPA Midstream's federal advocacy leader, Stuart Saulters, for an update on what's happening in the nation's capital. Stuart, welcome back.
Hey, good to be here, Kevin. As always, plenty to talk about, so happy to have this conversation.
Yeah, lots going on in D.C. and around the world. We're going to focus on D.C. though. So let's start with Congress. So first topic is the Fast Track Act. What is the Fast Track Act, and what does the proposed update to it mean for the midstream industry?
Yeah, a good question. And the Fast Track Act is a part of this broader effort we've seen in Congress to streamline permitting, to make it easier for infrastructure to be built. This is just one piece of legislation that kind of fits in that vein that we've seen a lot this Congress. I think all of our listeners are probably well aware of the delays and the burden that the current permitting process can have for stakeholders. If you're a pipeline company trying to get a pipeline built, you're going through multiple agencies, you're hitting the alphabet soup, whether it's the EPA, the DOE, the FERC, you're going to all these agencies getting permits. And so a couple years ago, there was legislation passed to create a process to where certain projects could apply to be in they call it Fast 41. Don't ask me what FAST stands for. It's an acronym, just like everything in DC is acronyms. But this Fast 41 process takes particular projects and kind of streamlines the permitting process. And so the fast track for those projects that qualify. So the Fast Track Act will just allow more projects to be a part of that Fast 41 process. And I mean, like we've talked about in the past, Kevin, either on this podcast or other podcasts that GPA Midstream has, like it's not the industry's hope to get rid of appropriate environmental review, appropriate analysis, whether it's, consumer rate, consumer affordability analysis. I mean, there's just some duplicativeness with that stuff. There's some, probably not necessary analysis with that. And so the Fast 41 process kind of helps mitigate some of that duplicative review, duplicative oversight. It streamlines a lot of things. And so having more projects, either projects that our members are doing or other parts of the economy are doing, be a part of this Fast 41 process will be good for everybody.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it fits right in with, as you say, with our efforts to streamline permitting, to not get rid of it, but to make it go faster and make it be something that's more predictable for companies, that if you get into the process, that all of the steps of it, including the litigation, which seems inevitable every time you apply for a permit, that that all of that can get worked through in a timely fashion.
Yep. Absolutely. Yep. And
Yeah,
this is,
I would say our permitting system seems to have grown up over the years by establishing something and then adding things onto it a bit at a time, rather than saying, what is the system that actually makes the most sense to protect the environment and make sure that we have all of the infrastructure and development that we need to grow the economy, to grow society.
yep. Absolutely. No, there is a very definite need for a modernization of this permitting process, just given, technology, innovation, the way companies operate now versus in the past. The one thing I'll say too is like this is a bipartisan bill, so it's sponsored by a Democratic representative from Western Pennsylvania and a Republican representative. Oh man, I shouldn't have said that because I'm probably not going to remember, but I'm pretty sure it's Colorado. But we can get fact checked on that. But again, bipartisan, like so many things in Congress these days when it comes to permitting, both sides of the aisle recognize this problem and want to solve it.
Now, we didn't talk about this in the preparation, but how does this fit in with, say, Senator Armstrong's bill? Is this a complement to that? Is this sort of an addition?
Yeah, and this is kind of where it's interesting when you look at how the House of Representatives does legislation and the U.S. Senate does legislation. So the House of Representatives, typically, at least this Congress, has introduced a bunch of bills, and they've just sent them to the various committees that have jurisdiction. The committees have, had hearings about them, have marked them up, have passed them out of committee. Sometimes, like we saw with the chair of the House Natural Resources Committee, Bruce Westerman, his bill has passed the House. There's also been a handful of others that have passed the House, but they've passed them as individual bills. In the Senate, you see a lot of bills being introduced, like we saw with Senator Armstrong, like we've seen with other bills that senators have introduced, but they're not necessarily going through that process of being referred to. I mean, they're referred to the committee, but they're not looked at in a hearing separately, marked up, like we see in the House. And so I think what you'll see in the Senate is you'll see a lot of the bills, like we saw from Senator Armstrong, be introduced, but they'll be packaged together. And as a package, they'll kind of work through the legislative process. Or you may see, like, the chair of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, Shelley Moore Capito, she may introduce a bill, and in her bill is elements of Senator Armstrong's bill, or Senator Lee is also introduced some legislation. And so you kind of see like a chairman's bill versus like a wholesome thing versus like individual ones. But, at the end of the day, I mean, these two chambers will have to conference and work out, the differences in the bills or what they want in a bill that can pass both chambers and eventually be sent to the president.
Let's shift gears because that's one thing happening in Congress. There's a lot happening on the regulatory side as well.
Yeah.
So let's start with this. So last week we put out a statement that talked about our support for PHMSA's effort to update pipeline repair criteria. So what would their proposal change? Why are we supporting it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a different aspect of our government, legislative branch versus executive branch, or Congress versus administration, but the theme is the same. It's still modernization. You see, hopefully, Congress modernizing the permitting process, and now you see PHMSA in the executive branch as part of the administration modernizing some of their regulations. So repair criteria is a huge aspect of an operator's integrity management program. And so, you as an operator are responsible for maintaining the integrity of your pipe. You do that by inspecting it. And when you inspect your pipe, if you find something, then you have to go to the code and figure out, hey, do I need to repair this, or can I monitor it? Is it detrimental to the integrity of the pipe, or is it something we can, operate within certain limitations and kind of live with, so to speak? So it's unfortunate, but there are, dig ins. And so maybe you have a backhoe that digs into your pipe and puts a dent in it. You find that dent by running an inline inspection tool, or you obviously, hopefully, the operator of that backhoe calls you and says, oh, I'm sorry, I put a dent in your pipe. And so you can kind of inspect it. Well, based on, certain aspects of that dent and how the repair criteria and the code is laid out, you have to either act or monitor that dent. And so like I said earlier, this is a modernization effort because the technology to inspect our pipelines across our country has vastly advanced. And so when this code was first written, we did not have the technology we have now. We did not have the engineering analysis capability we have now. And so this is a very much welcomed modernization of the code to accommodate these really powerful tools we have in our country. You think about artificial intelligence and the way you can dissect data, large swaths of data. You think about imaging technology, right? Like with some of these inspection tools, it's kind of like going to the doctor and getting an MRI. It's the same kind of imaging technology. You think about folks that are having babies and being able to do like a 4D sonogram, right? So just kind of that technology is now applied and looking at, you know, how metal is deformed, or how metal, how it's all I'm a civil engineer, so I'm going to mess up the chemistry, but there's little things in the metal that should look the way they look. And so now you can see that stuff with the imaging. And so again, just a very welcomed step from PHMSA to take a look at their regulation, realize we need to keep up with technology and to change their regulation to accommodate these new tools we have.
So what's the, I guess, practical effect on midstream companies, on our members in terms
Yeah.
of, cost, efficiency, all of those sorts of things?
Yeah. Very positive. So yeah, so I mean it's a good thing, right? So you're talking about, you know, in the past, it's unfortunate, but you have a backhoe hit your line, no questions asked. You gotta take that pipe out of service. You gotta either, if it's depending on the section of pipe and what the damage looks like, you have to cut out that section of pipe. You have to replace that section of pipe. I mean, there's repair techniques that are available, but like again, do you want to do that? Take that chance based on certain repair techniques. And so, and I mean, and also too, like from an emission standpoint, when you take a pipe out of service, I mean, you got to blow it all the way down, right? Because you're potentially welding on that pipe, and if you weld on that pipe with product, with natural gas in the line, it's not going to be good. And so from an emission standpoint, you take a natural gas line out of service, you're blowing down all those emissions to atmosphere. There's ways that we've kind of learned to capture that gas, reuse that gas, but I think the practical impacts are less kind of unintended consequences from repairs that may not be necessary because of the new technology we have to get the new information we need to make informed engineering decisions. And so there's still the onus on the operator to be diligent, to make wise engineering decisions, but there's more resources available to where they can make those decisions in an informed way and do it, with less burden, with less pipes out of service. I don't know. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's exactly the kind of thing I was thinking about is how is this gonna have an impact? Because obviously a pipeline operator, our members, they have every incentive in the world to make sure that all of their equipment is in great operating condition, right? That the everything that they're trying to move stays in the pipe and until they are transferring it to the next point, at which point it also needs to stay in the system all the way through until it's used, right? And there are environmental reasons for that and climate reasons for that, but there are also just the economic reasons of, that anything that gets lost along the way is something those are molecules you can't sell. So there's every incentive for our members to take that very seriously. And sounds like what you're saying is that we've made huge advancements in terms of the technologies and the ability to determine what's really important to fix right now and what can we keep an eye on and get to at a future point when there are, say, other maintenance things happening, that then you can also go in and fix that section of pipe, say, that's been dented, versus having to shut everything down and do it right away.
Exactly. Right. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a very, very much improved way of, kind of like what needs to be fixed now, what can be put on a list, what can be monitored. So I think it's good to see this move from PHMSA.
All right. So our next topic, it's the Securities and Exchange Commission, and they've announced an intention, a proposal to completely rescind 2024 climate reporting rules. So, in layman's terms, what does that mean? What are they proposing to stop?
Well, you're a publicly traded company. You've got to make filings for your investors for the SEC. In the past, the SEC had proposed that some of those reportings were around your emissions, and you had to disclose some of your environmental impacts. I said emissions, but because that's the big one, right? Kind of how much methane are you emitting? CO2 are you emitting? And so that was a burden because, you as a company and kind of the way the proposal was came out initially, the SEC made some changes. I mean, there's kind of some positive changes that were made, but essentially, I mean, you as a publicly traded company would have to quantify all the emissions of your operations. So if you think about like a UPS, what are all your trucks driving around emitting? And then there was also some conversation within the SEC about, other aspects of your supply chain that you had to account for. And so in our context, you may not be a publicly traded company. If you're a GPA Midstream member, you may be a smaller gatherer, a smaller processing company. But because you sold natural gas to Google, Google would now come to you and be like, hey, what's your emissions? Because they had to account for everybody in their supply chain. And so a lot of our members were impacted by, would have been impacted by this proposal, either themselves having to report to the SEC because they're publicly traded, or, they would have to provide a publicly traded company they work with the information because they had to tell the SEC that information. And so it was going to be a big one. I mean, it was going to be a burden. And I think, it kind of goes back to some of what I said earlier about with permitting. Like, I don't think anybody's trying to skirt the obligations we have as companies to be responsible to the environment, to support efforts for cleaner air, to support efforts for cleaner water. It's just practically we have to do these things. But then also, like, the SEC is a financial institution. Like, it is trying to capture information to make investors, shareholders aware of, risk within certain companies, right? And that usually happens on like the profit to earnings ratio. Like that's that kind of stuff, right? And so I think it's just more of a kind of, if something like that needs to happen, like, should it happen with the EPA? And I think there's things happening with the EPA where we're trying to quantify emissions and trying to capture, and reduce emissions. And so I think there was a little bit of just riding the ship as well when the SEC rescinded this proposal, trying to make sure everybody's playing in their sandbox.
What are our advocacy priorities now going forward? So SEC, excuse me, is going to rescind this rule. And so where do we stand overall as an industry, as an association? Where do our members stand with in terms of this kind of emissions disclosure reporting? And, you know, do they want it? Do they not want it? Basically where are our priorities aligned here?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, we have a lot of members, and we have big members, big corporate members. We have small privately held members. Because of their operations, they handle this differently, right? And so, like I said earlier, all of them are finding leaks, mitigating leaks, fixing leaks if they find them. But at the same time, like, how they report those emissions numbers is variable. There are some, because they're publicly traded, even though the SEC doesn't require this information to be disclosed, their board is telling them, I want this information. And so they're capturing those numbers. They're quantifying their emissions. They're telling their board, hey, we're taking these steps to to mitigate emissions. There's a handful of voluntary efforts underway to to support industry efforts to mitigate emissions. So, we there's a group out there called One Future, which is doing really good work supporting a handful of operators, some of who are our members, and kind of helping, uh, you know, set a benchmark for what should be the emissions reduced by, and trying to support their members and reducing those emissions. Some of the work from the government is, I wouldn't say rolling back those reporting requirements, but it is changing them. There is some conversation within the federal government, this administration, on what is required to be reported. So it's still TBD on what that is. But I think, to answer your question, we still have members that are quantifying those emissions. All of our members are trying to reduce their emissions, but it's just kind of like how it's reported is varied. So hopefully that makes sense.
So yes, it does. And so my next question is about exports. of
Mhm.
natural gas products, and how do the role of the growing exports of midstream products affect these kinds of views on disclosure
Yeah.
of emissions?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. And I think it varies, right? I mean, just like you may have a publicly traded company that's board is requiring it to disclose certain things, quantify certain emissions. You may have a customer that is based in the EU that's requiring you to quantify certain emissions because they want to know. They want to know what is up and down their supply chain. How is the environment impacted? And so you enter into that contract with that customer. He or she may say, hey, if you're going to sell me gas, you've got to do this and that, or I want to know this and that. And that's kind of, I don't want to say case by case, because there is conversation happening within the EU government about what methane rules look like. I think those are still a little TBD, but I think that is a conversation that's happening. And you don't want to lose sight on the the I guess what are to what I said earlier. Like there is a lot of effort underway to mitigate emissions. We as a country have very clean natural gas. It is produced cleanly, it's transported cleanly. Even those LNG ships, I mean, they go to extremes to try to make sure that stuff travels across the ocean in a clean way. Whether it's a natural gas engine that's driving that LNG ship or diesel engine that's got, some type of emissions capture on the top of it to clean that before it's emitted, to scrub, those emissions before they're released into the atmosphere. Like there's definitely steps happening now to make the supply chain cleaner. And so, yeah, I mean, I think we'll see what the EU comes up with. We'll see what companies have to do based on conversations with their, buyers, so to speak. But definitely don't want to downplay, how clean our industry is now and the strides we're making.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Last topic. You have some
Yeah.
health.
Yeah, I do.
So last week we announced the addition of Tyler Menzler to the GPA Midstream Advocacy team. So tell us, who is Tyler? What's his background and what does he bring that's going to help advance our member interests in DC?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think most people know, but we're headquartered in Tulsa. I think we like to say we have a Houston office, which is maybe your house. And then we have a DC office, which today is my house, but normally we do have an office. But yeah, but I think, well, I say Tyler, we've always had two people here in DC. For a little while, that spot has been vacant. And now Tyler has joined our team, and I am incredibly grateful. He'll be helping out with our federal affairs, our federal advocacy efforts. Tyler has a lot of experience. So he most recently worked on Capitol Hill. He was a chief of staff for a member of Congress, has been in that leadership role for other members of Congress. He's worked at an association as well. So he brings some experience from the trade association side of things. And so I'm excited to have him on board. I think I'm most excited just with his ability to build coalitions. I think within our industry and within what we do from an advocacy perspective, we like to have big tents. And so where we can come together, leverage our members, but then also leverage the members of other energy trade associations, leverage the members of other associations or chambers even. We've talked to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and employees on past podcasts. And so that's a group that we want to coalition with when we can. We've talked to individuals from the National Association of Manufacturers. And so when we want to leverage their membership, join in efforts together, it's important to build coalitions to support advocacy efforts. But then also within Congress, a lot of what Tyler did, a lot of what you do as a chief of staff is, you're helping your boss, you know, align with other members of either your party or the different party or of the other party. And so, his ability to navigate and build coalitions of members on Capitol Hill will also be critical as we try to advance our efforts within the halls of Congress. So Tyler's got a great personality. I'm excited for our members to meet him, to get to know him, to work with him. I think he'll be a great asset to our team. And yeah, I'm excited to see what we can get done now that we've got a full complement here in DC.
Yeah. Yeah. We got two DC offices now
Yeah.
because
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's true.
Tyler's
Yeah.
got a house too.
Yeah. Although if you come to DC, I was going to say, if you come to DC, we'll take you to the real office. I don't know if you want to
Yeah.
come to our house,
Yeah.
but
Is there anything else that, we should pass along to members today before we wrap up?
yeah, I mean, the one thing I'll say is I hope that folks see kind of, you know, obviously the theme of modernizing both, regulations and legislation. And hopefully folks are seeing GPA Midstream support in that effort. Like I said, I don't want to downplay anything our members are doing because they're doing so much proactively. It's just the laws have to keep up, and so we want to be supportive of laws that can keep up with what our members are doing to decrease emissions, what our members are doing to ensure pipeline integrity. And so both in the halls of Congress and these agency buildings, we want to support modernization efforts because that's how you're going to get the energy from where it's produced to where it's needed. And I don't think anybody that's listening to this will doubt that our country is in a huge demand for energy.
So, final question. Obviously, we are a member-driven organization. We rely heavily on our members through our committee structure to provide all kinds of input. So, we definitely need our member input on climate disclosure rules. We need it on pipeline repair criteria. So, how can people get involved in the work that you guys are doing on the advocacy side?
Yeah. So echo what you said. We are very much member driven and we get our input from our members through our committees. And so anybody listening that's not on a committee, join a committee. We have a handful of advocacy committees that tackle the appropriate topics. So, the repair criteria proposal we mentioned earlier, we will be working on comments. And so that'll be handled by the Pipeline Safety Committee. So if you're interested in being a part of our efforts to inform PHMSA on their repair criteria proposal, join our Pipeline Safety Committee. Obviously, the emissions, we're engaging EPA on that conversation, and that'll be managed through our Environmental Committee. So be a part of that committee. We have a legislative committee, we have a regulatory committee. So all of that stuff is available on our website. Please check it out. And I do encourage you to be a part of one of those committees. We, these policymakers, hopefully maybe some of them listen. And so I might insult a few by saying this, but I'd say 90% of them are lawyers, and that's a very good profession. But when you're making laws about gas processing operations, it really helps when you hear from a gas processing operator. And that's where the input from our committees can inform these policymakers, these lawyers for the most part, on what they're doing. And so, yeah, got to be a part of the conversation to make sure we steer the conversation.
So, I echo, definitely visit gpamidstream.org and check out the committees tab. You'll see the advocacy, you'll see all of the various advocacy, safety, technical. There's a communications committee. Pick one, get involved. Also, encourage you to check out the events calendar. We have some things coming up. We've just opened registration for engineering data book training, which will be happening in October in Midland, Texas. We have School of Gas Chromatography that starts next week. There's still very few spots left, but you have time to register if you do it in the next couple of days. So jump in there if you need to do that. And we've got an intro to midstream that's coming up also like in October, November. We haven't opened registration for that. We haven't announced dates for that yet, but watch for that. And of course, we have our convention coming up in September where all of these committees will be meeting. So you'll have a chance to meet everybody. You'll have a chance to network with your colleagues, with your peers around the industry through these committees. It's a great event. More than 1,800 people come. And our early bird registration discount ends on Friday. So act now and you can save yourself few $100. And we'll see you next week
Yeah.
on another episode of the Midstream News Podcast.